Hello Explorer and welcome to this tutorial. I'm Aline, Skeinwalker, the knitwear designer behind Skeinwalker Knits. In this tutorial I'm going to walk you through the section of a Skeinwalker pattern. So knitting patterns come in all shapes and sizes. There is no ISO standard or huge norm about how a knitwear pattern is written. So every designer is kind of using their own format and structure. So I'm going to explain to you how I structure a pattern and what sections you can find in a pattern PDF of mine. So on the screen you can see the raspberry bush cowl pattern. It's a free cowl pattern, so you can download it if you want and follow along. You can download it and knit the project. It's a fun lace project, but I'm going to walk you through the sections of this specific pattern today. So what you see now on the screen is the first page of the pattern. So typically what I do is I include a large picture of the sample as I worked it. In the yarn I used to work the project and the pattern. I list so the picture, the name, and the type of pattern that this is. So in this case, this is a cowl pattern. Let me see, I'm going to select this, see if you can see that. No, for oh yeah, okay, this, okay. So you can see my cursor, the small little hands here. Here I list the type of, I have my text cursor finally. The type of pattern that this is. In this case, it's easy because it's just a cowl, only a cowl. I do have some patterns where I have two sizes or two types of patterns. So it could be a scarf slash stole, or it could be a cowl slash scarf. So that gives you an indication of what type of pattern this is. Then I have a block with some contact information, my email address and Ravelry and social media, plus my website. And after that, I have a block of text where I explain the characteristics of the pattern, my inspiration usually, and any highlights that I want to put emphasis on. So that was the first page, easy. Then we come to the beginning of the pattern. So I will list the notions and the yarn and a lot of other information. So let's go through this. So first the yarn, right here. I have a section with what yarn I used. I can zoom in a bit to show you better. I will first walk you through the general structure. So here I have the yarn, the notions, then some skill level. I usually put extensive pattern notes. In general, I then have a section with stitch patterns, which can be long. In this case, not too long. After the definition of the stitch patterns, I will have the pattern itself with the setup, the edging, then the body of the project, and then an edging for the ends, a bind off, and then some sections for finishing, customizing the size, and then after that I have all the abbreviations, a little block about my background as a knitwear designer or not a knitwear designer, and then I have a schematic. For a cowl, it's pretty simple. For a shawl, it could be giving more information about what's the shape, the final shape of the shawl. Then after that, I usually put all the charts. I put them as large as I can on the pages that I have available to me. Well, the page size, the number of pages is basically sort of unlimited, but the page size. And after that, I include a lot of pictures of the pattern sample. So I include some pictures of how I block the cowl and some pictures usually of the stitch patterns, how they are blocked when they're finished. Then some styled pictures of the sample. And after that, most patterns have an extensive list of tutorials, so I will list the tutorials that I filmed myself to show you exactly the techniques I used for working this pattern. So there are techniques, stitches, there are tips, and there could be some information about reading charts or moving markers and so on and so on. So this list can be really long. I have a copyright section with some links to all my websites, Ravelry page, and so on. This pattern was originally published in the Notion magazine, so there's a reference to the Notion magazine and some more tutorials. And after that, I have some suggestion, some patterns of all the patterns of mine that you might like, and I have a contact page where you can find all my links again and my website. All those images are clickable, so you can email me if you want and so on. And those are all the platforms where I'm on. So this is the general structure of a pattern. Now I'm going to go back to the start, and especially page 2, where the pattern is actually starting, or the pattern PDF. So I'm going to zoom in. Let's see how it looks like so. So it's a lot bigger now. So when I start the pattern, of course, I list all the materials and the things you will need. So that includes yarn and needles, of course. So the yarn, I typically list what's the amount of yarn you get in a skein or a ball of yarn, because sometimes if you use indeed yarns, this could change, and it does matter if you get 50 grams or 100 grams. So I list in meters and I list in yards, and I will list how many balls, in this case, how many balls or skeins of yarn you might need, most probably. So in this pattern, I was able to squeeze the cowl into two balls of yarn. But it's a very tight finish. So to not have you play yarn chicken, I recommend 3 balls of yarn, and you might not need the third ball. In general, and this was not my intention to use only 2 balls of yarn, but that's the way it turned out. In general, I try to keep a buffer of 5 to 10% of yarn remaining. I do not count the swatches that I make in this count, in this total of grams. So it's only for working the sample. So I will list how many grams of yarn I used for working the sample myself and which color I used. In this case, berry. Then I have a section about the needles. This one is straightforward. I'm just using one set actually, because I need 2 needles, but this is one circular needle with 1 cable. If it's a shawl, I could have more needles listed, or if there is an edging or finishing or anything that requires a different size, then I will also list that in this section. Then I have a section about the gauge. The gauge starts in general by listing an unblocked gauge. So it could be stockinette, it could be garter if I used garter, it could be brioche if I used brioche. But then I list that because it gives you an idea of what the gauge was like without any blocking. Especially lace, when you work lace, you can block really aggressively and you can really increase the dimensions of your project dramatically. So before and after blocking. And of course, that's going to have an impact on the gauge. So to give you some direction, I list an unblocked gauge, whatever makes sense for the pattern. So in that case, this is stockinette based lace. So I list the stockinette gauge unblocked. And also, when I measure, I don't stretch it. I will tend to pin the swatch I made to flatten it, but I'm not going to stretch the stitches because it should be the bare stockinette gauge unblocked. Then I list the gauge in stitch pattern, whatever pattern makes sense, and it's blocked. So it's blocked gauge. So I will always wet block my projects. So that means that the gauge is the gauge I gets once the project is all blocked and wet blocked and stretched and everything. For accessories, gauge is not really crucial. It will not make the project unwearable unless it's a cowl and the circumference become too small. Then it's going to be unbearable. Unwearable, maybe also unbearable, I don't know. But then it's not that crucial, but it will affect, of course, the finished size, and it will affect how much yarn you're going to use. So keep that in mind. If you're short on yarn and your gauge is way looser than the gauge that is listed in the pattern, then you might use more yarn than I did. And every knitter knits differently, so there is a lot of variation in gauge and in the weight of the yarn that a knitter uses. Then the next section is about all the notions that are needed for that project. In this case, I'm using removable stitch markers. Um, in general, I give as advice to use at least one marker for knitting in the round. So this is the beginning of round marker. It's easier to keep your place if you have a beginning of round marker. So for me, this one is not optional, but of course you can omit all the markers if you want. Then I list a number of repeat markers and maybe other kind of special markers, and all those other ones are optional. If we need any other needle as helper needle, or if we need a cable needle or anything else, I will list this in the notions. And typically for weaving in your ends, you will need a tapestry needle, and for blocking the project, you might want to use blocking pins. Potentially blocking wires. So blocking pins will make sure that your project is stretched properly and that you can create peaks or scallops when you are blocking the project. The wires are optional, but of course you can decide if you want to block your project differently. That's totally fine. Then I list the size. This pattern has only one size and it's very easy to customize. So you can adjust the circumference and the height of the cowl. If it's a shawl, you can, repeat more of the stitch patterns and alter also the final measurements of the shawl. That's totally fine. Some patterns come with several sizes. So typically I have a lot of patterns for which I make a scarf and a stole. So in that case, you have two sizes. And I also have patterns where you can make a cowl or scarf, and I also list two sizes. And the easily customizable, then I will adapt that to how actually customizable the project is. Then I have the final measurements. For a cowl, it's a circumference and height. You can check the dimensions, the measurements on the schematic. So there I refer to C as circumference and H as height. And for a shawl, you will have more measurements. Then I have a section about the skill level, which describes what kind of stitch patterns that I used, or what kind of stitches I would say I used in the pattern. So basic stitches are knit samples. I used increases. In this one, I use single and double decreases. So you know that you will probably need to do some knit two together and some SSKs and maybe some knit three together and other kind of double decreases. I will list any other stitches, of course, that I used. It could be slip stitches, it could be cable, a mosaic, brioche, and so on. They will be listed in the skills that are necessary for the pattern. For all the techniques, well, or maybe for as many techniques as I can, and in general, all the stitches, I will have specific tutorials that you can refer to, and those will help you with learning new techniques and stitches possibly. So if you see something in the skill level that you don't know how to do, for example, maybe you don't know how to do the elastic bind off, then you can refer to the tutorial at the end of the pattern to really watch how I did that. skill level is not only about stitches and techniques, it's also how fluent you are with a specific form of knitting. So in this case, for lace, it's going to be how complicated or easy the lace is. So some lace patterns, stitch patterns, are really easy to remember and you can be almost going on autopilot, which is also kind of dangerous with lace, but let's put that aside for a moment. But some lace patterns will also require a lot of attention. Like it's might not be TV knitting for everybody. So you can check here in this section how much attention you need to give to the stitch pattern while you are knitting it. So if you are interrupted a lot because, I don't know, you travel or you sit on a bus and there's a lot going on around you, I don't know, anything, it could be that a stitch pattern that requires really a lot of attention is maybe not the best project. But if you're really comfortable with lace and you know you can do that, that's totally fine. So you can decide for yourself when and where you want to knit the project. Of course, you can always try it out, use a swatch, and so on. Then I list whether or not the lace patterning happens on every other round or not. So in that case, the lace patterning is only on odd rounds, meaning that on even rounds you're going to have a rest row, so to speak. Typically during the rest rows, what I would do is to double check if I still have all the stitches I have to have and if I put the yarn overs at the right spot. But this is another tip. Okay, so elastic band off, that's the last skill that you need for this one, and all the video tutorials are listed on page 1 or page 8, or starting on page 8. So then I have in my patterns, in many of my patterns, I have an extensive pattern notes section. In very easy patterns, I still have a pattern notes section, but it could be shorter. But usually I try to explain, I give some tips actually about the project. Then I explain some specificities of working a stitch pattern or anything that is relevant for that specific knitwear pattern. And I try to give you the how and the why. By the way, I try to do that also in the tutorials. So it's not only about how you do something, but it's also why, very often, why you need to do something like this. So in the raspberry bush cowl pattern, I list that the pattern is working around. The stitch count remains constant throughout one stitch pattern. In this case, you'll see why later. And then it could be that the stitches, the stitch counts remain always the same, or it could be, if it's a shawl especially, that the stitch count is going to increase because your shawl is going to increase. So this is going to be listed here. Then I give some tips about long tail cast on, and in this specific pattern I will explain what happens to markers. Sometimes if you want to use markers, sometimes you can just put them in between the stitch repeats and just move them as you come to them, but sometimes you will need to move the markers, and that is dependent on the stitches that are used in the specific stitch patterns. Typically, when you have double decreases over the edge of a repeat, or near the edge of a repeat, you might have to move stitch markers. So in this specific pattern, I also explain extensively why and how you move the markers, and then I give some extra instruction for the chart knitters. So this is for a cowl. If there is anything else to explain for a shawl, a scarf, a stole, or anything, I will put it in there, and then you can refer to it as you knit the pattern. It's better in general to go through the whole pattern once before you start knitting it, but maybe some things will only make sense once you start knitting them. So don't dive too much into the details, but at least you will know the structure of the pattern PDF in that case. So the next section, and it's a long one in general, is the stitch patterns section. Here I will define all the stitch patterns that I'm going to use in that specific PDF, that specific knitwear pattern. So here I have 3, an edging at the beginning of the main lace pattern, and an edging at the end. For almost every stitch pattern that I write, I will make a chart and also include the written instructions. If it doesn't make sense to make a chart because something is only knit across, then I will not make a chart. But in general, I really include both charts and written instructions. Personally, I'm a very visual person and I like to use the charts, but I know that some knitters have difficulties with charts and they really need written instructions, so they are included also in my patterns. With many projects or many patterns, I would say I include the stitch counts in the written instructions, like here. In this case, we have increased 1 stitch. If it's a shawl pattern, the structure could be slightly different. If it doesn't make sense for me to list all the stitch patterns as one block at the beginning of a pattern, then I will include them in a slightly different way in the body, in the pattern section that you will soon see on the next page. But if you're knitting a shawl pattern, you will find your way. The structure is almost the same. With the shawl pattern though, I will do my best to include the stitch counts in a separate section. So this is a cowl and there is not very much variation in the stitch count. So that means that I do not include a table to say that I increased 1 stitch between round 1 and round 2 of my edging. So for a shawl or anything that has a lot of variation in the stitch counts, I will try and do my best to include a table with stitch counts, because when I was not a designer yet, and when I was knitting projects and making shawls and that sort of things, I found it very nice to have to know the stitch counts, so that I could, count my stitches from time to time and know if I was on track or not. So that's a special thing for cowls, or a special thing for shawls. Then we have the lace pattern with all the written instructions, all the way to round 46. And then we have here in this specific cowl an edging, the end edging, and in this case I'm decreasing 1 stitch, and it's also in the written instructions. Can I get rid of the block? Yes. Okay, so then comes really the center part of the pattern PDF, the pattern itself, all the pattern instructions. Let's start here. Once you see this section, pattern, the pattern instructions start. I very often get the question, hey, but I don't know how many stitches to cast on. Well, this is indicated then in the pattern section in the setup, right here. And the reason why knitters get confused about, but I don't know what to cast on, is that I use the definition of all the stitches, of all the stitches first, like it's, if I can scroll, it start here, first the definition of all the stitch patterns, and then the pattern itself. It's difficult to scroll. And then the pattern itself starts right here at pattern and setup, or any note that I would need in between. But usually pattern, setup, and then I have the cast on that I used, and the number of stitches that I used to knit the sample. Of course, if there are different sizes, 2 sizes in the pattern PDF, then I will list all the cast on numbers in there too. Then I have a section here for cowls about placing the beginning of round marker, and then being careful not to twist the first rounds of the cowl. If that happens to you and you notice it soon enough, double check one of the tutorials at the end of the pattern. This will help you with fixing the twist. If you worked several rounds, well, there is no other solution than ripping. And then once we have a cast on, we're going to join in the round with extra instruction here. We will start working the edging, or whatever stitch pattern makes sense or is required for the project. If you want to place markers, then this will either be indicated here or in the pattern notes, and also in the instructions, or not in this case. sometimes, very often, in the written instructions of the stitch pattern, the first stitch pattern. The reason why I didn't use markers right from the start is because, well, it's a purl one knit one, and I guess that besides the beginning of round marker, you probably don't need markers to knit this. This is seed stitch though, so the purl one knit one becomes a knit one purl one on the second round. And then you might want to use markers for pattern B, but this is your choice. So in this specific pattern, I list this here. If you want to use markers, you can place them. If you don't want them, keep the beginning of round marker and you're done. So different pattern PDFs for different projects will give you different instructions for the markers, of course, and depending on how complex or easy the first stitch patterns are, you might or might not need markers for that. So then I list all the things that you need to work for the body of the pattern or body of the project. In this case, I'm working a pattern B twice because it's a tall pattern with 46 rows. And then to finish that pattern, I'm working 2 rounds once more. And once we're done with that, we can remove all the markers if you use the markers, because once more the edging will be seed stitch edging with 1 decrease. Again, when you work the patterns A, B, or C, in this case, you can refer to the written instructions that were before the pattern section or the charts that are after the pattern section. I try to have the charts on specific pages and not mix them with other text. Then you have a specific bind off. I tend to use elastic bind off for lace. It could be a knitted version or a purl version. So this one is knitted. You have the instructions. This one is not charted. And you can always check the tutorial to see how exactly I worked the bind off. Once the bind off is done, you can go to the finishing. So first, of course, you cut your yarn, you weave in and secure all your ends. In this case, there won't be that many ends because we are just using 2 to 3 balls of yarn and we have just one color. But then if you have a lot of color changes or stripes or anything, you might have a lot of ends to weave in. What I myself tend to do is not wait until the very end to use to weave in, I don't know, 10,000 ends on a project, because although it's easy, it's not the most exciting part of the knitting for me. So I try to spread them and do some ends before my project is finished. Then I advise to wet block the project, but that's your choice, of course. But then I give some extra tips and instructions on how to actually block the project. So in that case, I created some peaks on the long edges. So I used pins for that, and I steam block the creases that could have been created when I block the project flat. By the way, I just filmed a blocking tutorial and I'm going to add it to all my patterns, hopefully. It might take some time, but you can also refer to this as a help for blocking. Also make sure to refer to the blocking photographs because I include them in the pattern so that you know exactly how I blocked the project. And this is kind of important if you want to achieve the same look as I did. So blocking is just a very small paragraph of the pattern, but it's actually a very important step for your project. After the finishing section, I have a customizing size section. So in that section, I will list the things that you could do to change the measurements of the project. So for example, in a cowl, adjust the circumference by having more horizontal repeats. So in that case, I give you the multiple that you should use when you are adding repeats. In this case, it's 16. For a scarf or a stole or maybe a shawl, there would be edge stitches to take into account. So typically you would have maybe multiple of 16 stitches plus something, plus edge stitches, plus balancing stitches if you need those, and they will be listed here. I also list how many repeats I used myself for creating the sample. In this case, 6 repeats, so 6 times 16, and then you can choose if you want a larger or a smaller circumference. For a cowl, you need to decide that, of course, at the beginning, for a scarf as well, but for a cowl, you will be stuck with a given circumference from start to finish. A shawl is different, of course. To make a cowl taller or shorter, it's easier. Same thing if you want to make a scarf or a stole longer or shorter. You can decide as you go, as you knit, if you want to go and add repeats, vertical repeats this time, or remove some. So in that case, I list that you can add repeats of the edgings if you want that, or you could add repeats of pattern B, the lace pattern if you want. In that specific case, the stitch pattern is rather forgiving. You can stop in the middle of the lace pattern if you want. So if you suddenly run out of yarn, well, make sure that you keep some for the edging and the bind off, but in that case you could stop earlier and not work a full chart or written instructions of pattern B. And then you proceed as instructed to finish with the edging and the bind off. In this section, I will also list anything special if there's anything special about the pattern sequence. Sometimes I have patterns where I use a transition stitch pattern between two other stitch patterns, and those transition patterns do not need to be repeated or should not be repeated. So if there are exceptions to what you can do with a stitch pattern, I will tend to put them here. Also, if I think that some stitch patterns would look better after each other, then I will list that here. And of course, you're the boss of your project. You can decide what kind of sequence you want. Those are only suggestions. Don't be a slave to the pattern. You can experiment. If you do experiments, place a lifeline so that if you don't like it, you can read back and go back to a safe fallback place where you have your lifeline. That's an option. Then as the last thing in the customizing section, I will list how much yarn I needed, either for a round or for a full repeat, and in general how much I needed for the edging and the bind off or the bind off. For a cowl, your yarn consumption should be rather consistent across the cowl. Sometimes there is variation when you switch stitch patterns, but that can happen. But of course, for a shawl or something where the stitch counts increase between stitch patterns, then you will of course need more and more and more and more yarns. Maybe yarns, but maybe just one. So in that case, if the stitch count varies a lot, then I will include that in a table, as I said, and in the same table I will do my best to also include either a percentage of yarn used or the weight of yarn used, or sometimes a percentage of yarn remaining, so that you can plan what you want to do with your project. If you want to customize your project, you can weigh your yarn and decide how far you want to go or how tall you want to go, and make this dependent on how much yarn you have. So in a shawl, I could have a specific section with the stitch count and a yarn consumption, and it would be somewhere around here. And after that, I will have all the abbreviations listed. Anything I used in the pattern, in the stitch pattern definitions, or in the abbreviation themselves. Like, I don't know, this one is for the bind off. Well, anything that's needed should be listed in the abbreviation, including non-standard abbreviations such as moving markers, like so. So always check the abbreviations to see what you're supposed to do, what's a manipulation, a stitch manipulation or marker manipulation is that you need to perform. After that, I have some background information. As I said, I also have a link to my newsletter, the Explorers Weekly. I hope it's fun. You could subscribe. There are no strings attached, so you can also unsubscribe, no problem. But maybe you like what I share in there. This is also the place where I share some sneak peeks and some tips. whatever I'm working on, and I shall also share some exclusive coupon codes with my subscribers. After that, I have a schematic which will list again the measurements of the project. Here it's a cowl, so it's a tube. It's not that complex. If there is a more advanced or complex shape, I will make a schematic for that. If there are blocks of colors or anything, then I will also make a specific schematic for showing maybe the sequence of colors or anything that's necessary. So that's also a help to see what the project looks like when it's finished. Well, it's schematic, of course, but could give an idea. And then I have a page with all the tutorials. No, sorry, not yet the tutorial, sorry. All the charts. So here I have 3 kind of charts. An edging, the main lace pattern, which is a tall chart, and the final edging. You see that the repeat of the edgings are different than the repeat from the lace pattern. Of course, we are not losing stitches except one, but then this is the repeat is different. So here we have a repeat of 2 plus 1, and here we have a repeat of 16. That's because I'm using seed stitch for the edgings, and then I make sure that when I'm done with the edging, I use the required number of stitches for my lace. The chart pages or page will also list a key where all the symbols for the chart are defined. Once again, there is no big universal standard about chart symbols. There are a couple of sets that are used by publications and designers and so on. So always make sure to check the chart key. And if anything is unknown, to look at what the definition of a symbol is in the abbreviation section. It's also always good to check at least once what is the definition of the stitches that are given in the key. Check in the abbreviation section. They could be, slip with yarn in front or in back, or slip purlwise or knitwise. You might want to check this out. Okay, so that was the chart page. After that, I have all the pictures. You don't have to print these pages. If you want to print, you can just refer to these pages when you are ready to block. Then I show you exactly how I block the project. So typically for cowls, I use 2 blocking wires, and I'm using pins to create peaks or scallops. And then I have photographs of the stitch patterns once they are blocked and all opened and dry and everything, so that you can have a look at what a stitch pattern will look like in the end. And maybe double check for yourself if anything is unclear, how things will look or how things will combine, you can have a look at the pictures. Then I have some pictures of the cowl on a coat hanger, and in my latest pattern since a couple of years I also include a picture on a dress form to give you an idea of, you know, what the cowl or the project, because this could be another project, a shawl or a scarf, how it will look like on more or less on a human body. I like to keep the pictures clean and maybe a bit abstract, and I prefer to photograph my projects and my samples on light backgrounds. Same thing for the dress form. I use a dress form and not someone, to be able to focus more on the project and not on the person. And also, I live in a rather rainy country, and in that way I can photograph indoors. I have my own small place in my home that I treat as my knitwear photo studio, which I can build or, you know, put away when needed. And I can do all the things indoors, sorry, and not outdoors, when it's going to be windy and maybe rainy, and it's going to blur all my pictures and make the stitch patterns less visible. So especially wind is not handy when I knit outside, no, but mostly when I photograph outside. So this is how I prefer to do it. The pictures are not there to be just pretty, they are also there to show you what the finished project looks like. Either flat on a coat hanger or hopefully on a dress form. Then I have an extensive sections with all the tutorials that I have at the moment, and it's expanding all the time. But all the tutorials that are necessary for working the project. So like I said, I filmed a tutorial about blocking lace, blocking in general. I will add it to this pattern too. It's not in there yet, this is really fresh, but then I'm usually expanding on my library of tutorials. Although at some point I might not have a lot of more techniques to share for a specific pattern, but we'll see when I get there. In general, all the things you need to work the stitches or work any specific techniques like an elastic bind off are already listed in there, and I have a number of tips about selecting yarn for lace projects, reading charts, and so on and so on. If you are on a computer, mostly I know, at least on an Android tablet and on an Android phone, all these links are clickable. So you can click and open the tutorial directly on YouTube. If it doesn't work for you, try to copy. I cannot copy because it's going to go to the link, but try to copy the text. You could even copy all the text of all the tutorials, and you can copy that to a text file or something like that, and then you can pick a link and then copy paste it in your browser. Some devices and some browsers will block opening the link, so copy pasting might be the best option for you. I know that on a computer and on Android devices, at least it works for me. It could also be that you open the tutorial and that YouTube says, well, this tutorial doesn't exist anymore. And in general, this is not true. So what I would ask you, if that happens to you, is try another device or try at another moment, because usually the tutorials are still online. I don't retire anything. I just change the links in the patterns if I want to refresh a tutorial, but I don't remove tutorials from my YouTube channel. So try to reload or try another device or another browser, or try to clean the browser cookies. All those sort of things could help in actually convincing YouTube to load the tutorial. I wanted to say something additional about that, but I forgot, so maybe it's going to come back. Oh yes, the tutorials, 99% of the tutorials are unlisted, so they are not publicly visible on my YouTube channel, but then you have all the links that you need in the pattern PDF. Okay, so techniques and tips and everything, moving markers and elastic bind off, and how and when to use a lifeline, and so on and so on. They are all in there, and soon blocking, and soon this very tutorial about reading patterns or the structure of Skeinwalker patterns. Then the copyright section is listing all my links and websites and social media and everything you might want to check out. It's listing my newsletter again with the subscription page. You can get Skeinwalker news. Subscribe, please. And you can always unsubscribe at any time if you don't like it. And then we are going towards the end of the pattern. At the end of my patterns, I now include some suggestions of all the patterns that you might find nice to try, or if you want to experiment with something else. You have a selection of 4 patterns on this page. Of course, at the moment of filming this tutorial, I have more than 100 patterns. Still growing, I hope. So this is a very small selection of the patterns that I have. So check out on my website and on Ravelry, if you can go to Ravelry. I'm working at the moment at adding all my back catalog to my website, to that link, the pattern shop. Hopefully I'm going to be done in not too long, we'll see. Otherwise, all my patterns are currently available on Ravelry. A growing selection is available on my website, skeinwalker.com, and the selling the purchasing part is not done by my website itself. It's done by Payhip. So I have also a growing selection of patterns on Payhip. If you go to my website, then you will be able to see where the pattern is available. So, like I said, growing selection of patterns on my website. On my website, what I do that is not possible with Ravelry is to add some extra tags to my patterns, like is it textured, is it knitted lace, what shape is it a stash buster, is it, you name it. I have a tag cloud at the beginning of the website, at the top of the pattern shop, and then you can click on those tags and see what patterns are now available that have those characteristics. And I'm also always expanding on the tags because it's work that is never done. So check out the website and the pattern shop for more maybe inspiration. And then we are at the very last page of my patterns. I have a connect page. What is very nice for me as a designer is if you share your projects with me, and if you share your projects with other knitters, because it also helps spreading the word about Skeinwalker knits. And personally, I love to see the projects that you are making with my patterns. Publishing a Skeinwalker pattern, putting a PDF out there is just, it's a very long part of the process, but it's not the end. The end is that knitters are actually knitting the projects, and I love to see what knitters are doing. So share with me, share with your knitting friends, share on Ravelry if you can go there, or on Instagram or Facebook or wherever you are on social media. It will also help me as a designer. Thanks for that in advance. And then if you want to connect with me or follow any of my social media, then they are all listed here. Same thing here, those are clickable links. And you can again register for my newsletter, The Explorer Weekly. I share a lot in there. And then that's me. And with my motto, explore, dare, create. It's, knitting is about experimenting, and you can take time to explore and to expand your knitting horizons with new stitch patterns or new techniques or anything. So that's it. We're at the end. That was what a Skeinwalker pattern looks like. I'm going to make it fit on the page again. One more. Let me take a moment to check my notes to see if I forgot anything. I talked a lot already. This was a long tutorial, but I hope that gives you an idea of what's the structure of a Skeinwalker pattern. So let me see. Oh yeah, so there's one thing that I would like to mention. The beginning sections, what I include on my pattern pages, on Ravelry, on my website, and on Payhip are extensive notes and description about the knitwear pattern. So typically what I would include in this, if I can get the text cursor to stay, is all this. So everything that's now highlighted in blue, I will include on the pattern page. In addition to that, I also include, of course, the name of the pattern, the type of the pattern, and I include the inspiration and the highlights. So this text that I have on the first page. And of course, I have pictures. And this is to give you a good... this is to give you a lot of information about the project and the complexity of the project before you buy the pattern. So this Raspberry Bush is free, so it doesn't matter. You can, have a look, download it, and if you don't like it, you can put it aside. Or if you think, wow, it's way too complicated for me, you can put it aside for now and then wait until you have gained more skills maybe. But if it's a paid pattern, then you can have a look at the extensive descriptions, everything that you will need, including the skill levels and anything that's special about the pattern. I will list on the pattern page so that you know what you are purchasing and what you are diving into. Of course, it's like, this is not the pudding. You will have still to, have a look at the pattern to see how it's structured and everything. It's giving you an idea of how things could be. I have some patterns on Lovecraft, but then on that platform, the pattern descriptions do not allow designers to have a lot of characters. So the text that I can put in there is very limited, which means that for my patterns that are on Lovecraft, I cannot put all the extensive notes as I would like, which means that I have to compact everything and use less text. But then if you have a look at my website, then the whole text until the beginning of the pattern notes will be there. And I'm going to check my notes one more time. Last time, I hope. So this time I went through everything I wanted to say about Skeinwalker patterns, anything that comes to my mind today, right now. So I hope that this was helpful and this gives you an idea of the structure of the patterns. I try to focus on clarity and on describing why as well as how, which means that some patterns can have a lot of pages, but don't be scared by that. If you don't need the information, then you can just skip it, and if you need the information, it's in there. If you have questions about a pattern of mine, or you would like some help because you don't understand something or you're confused about something, please reach out and send me an email. My email address is here. It's also at the end in the copyright section, so you can contact me and ask me whatever you need to ask me. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope this was helpful, and talk to you next time. And in the meantime, I guess, happy knitting. Bye.